Just start this up. Great. So there's a couple of. So Lynn's brought in a few art materials that she wants to rehome. So if anybody wants any of those, they're over here. Please help yourself. So last week, it was a rather rushed demo because I ended up late because of the traffic. But what I did do was a demo on gridding images. And so basically the way I go about gridding is to, well, with this one, this is another one that I've done, so it's a slightly different version. So I've actually put the grid onto the plastic, so that makes it a little bit easier sometimes if you don't want to draw all over your photos. And then another idea when it comes to gridding is to have go drawing, copying it upside down. Because what you're trying to do is to just break it down into shapes, almost like abstract shapes. And it gets you to have to sort of really focus on what the actual shapes are themselves, rather than thinking, oh, I've got a person here, they've got fingers and eyes and noses. So that's quite a good technique, perhaps to try it upside down, or do a mixture of upside down and the right way up. So I'll turn that right way up now. Another thing that I found useful is where I've got a lot of detail, I've sort of subdivided the grid. I've made some sort of like marks halfway, or you could even do quarters if you want. And you can measure that, or you can just judge that by eye. And doing the same sort of thing with the image itself. So that's the right way around there. Yeah, helps me to work those sort of detailed areas in. There's lots I could put in. I've not bothered putting the stripes on the shirt in and things like that, because what I tend to do is get some paint down there, and then I'll do a little bit more drawing once the paint's there. Another idea that I sort of, one thing I did start doing at one point is if you've got a grid on a board or a canvas and you're about to put paint over it all and you think you might need the grid back again, it's just to mark on the edge of the canvas or the board where your grid lines are, so that if you need to re-establish it, you can then just sort of draw them back in again. Then on the edge, you can just redraw them. So that's just a little tip that, something that I discovered for myself is a good way of just re-establishing the grid if I need to. There. Yeah, I think that's about it. So yeah, I've just sketched it out with pastel pencil. I've got most bits in. I think I might have, he's got another hand to go in somewhere here, so that would be there. And again, with the complicated bits, I sometimes start with the more complicated shape and then work in. So I think his thumb would be there, and then the guitar there, and half his arms there. And then once you've developed this as a painting, so if I was using either acrylics or oil paints, these happen to be oils, and these are the water-soluble oils, so I can thin them a little bit with water, and I can wash my brushes with water, which is nice because I don't have to have the solvents in here. I've just got a few colours out. This palette's a little bit dirtier than the last time, but I've got a blue, well, it's all dry, so it doesn't matter. So ultramarine blue and cerulean blue. So basically you've got a blue that's a little bit purpley and a blue that's a slightly greeny blue. There's a little bit of brown there, burnt umber I think that is, some white, and then cadmium yellow pale, which is quite a good one, and then alizarin crimson here, and that is cadmium red. So I find that with those colours I can mix quite a lot with just those colours. So just a few primary colours, a little bit of brown and some white. I've got lots of colours there, and I may need some others, but I think that will be enough to get going. I tend to work the background, a little bit background in first. So these shrubs here, I'll mix with a bit of yellow and blue, and a little bit of white because they're kind of in the distance. They're not very bright, so they would go in about there. And I'm not trying to sort of replicate everything about them to start with. That's a little bit of brown and yellow blue in there as well. So I just want to get a sense of something in the background. I probably wouldn't want to paint those in too much detail. if I go a little bit too dark, that works out better because I can then put lighter colours over the top. So I'll just go a little bit too strong to start with. The bin I'm going to ignore because, to be honest, it distracts from the figures. I just quite like the idea of these two figures sitting on the sea wall, a little bit of background there. And then that can be that bit. Perhaps mix a colour for the pavement area. So again, it's this pinky grey. So I'll use a little bit of brown, a tiny bit of red, and a tiny bit of the slightly purpley blue, and that should get me a kind of pinky grey. And plenty of white, just a tiny bit of water. So with these paints, sometimes you just add the tiniest bit of water, but I don't want to make them too thin. Basically just sort of put some colour down and just sort of spread that. I'd rather just sort of spread the colour thinly, like that. Now the grid I drew on, I used pastel pencil, and if you use graphite, sometimes the grids really show through. So if you were using a graphite pencil, it's probably a good idea to get rid of the grid before you then put the paint on. But this will, this should mix in fairly well. That might be a bit too pink, so I can always alter that. But to start with, I'm not too worried because I'll probably put another layer of paint over some of this. So that can be, perhaps go a little bit lighter. So the idea is to sort of get some paint everywhere, some colour everywhere. This, being oil paint, it is going to take quite a while to dry. So I'll only be able to get so much done in the first layer. But yeah, I'll carry that background on there. And then I'll just work a little bit in, perhaps I'll do a little bit on one of these figures. Yeah, so you could then start working the figures themselves. So I can mix a flesh tone and just perhaps put some tones in for their faces. So again, a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow, and some white. If you've got one of these sheets of plastic, you can just kind of offer up your colour, just pop a bit on and just see how close it is. Yeah, so that's quite a good way of just taking that. So that'd probably be alright for the lighter areas, but the shadows can be a bit darker. And I quite like to start with darker tones and then paint the lighter tones into them. So I'll add a little bit of brown to that sort of mix. So some yellow and some red and some brown to make a kind of flesh tone for the shadows. It could be brown or maybe even a little bit of blue. Try a little bit of blue. Sometimes the shadows are slightly bluey, slightly cooler. So it could be a little bit of blue there. Basically want to, again, check the tone there. That seems to work out fairly well. And then his neck is just in there, a little bit of his chin in there. And then go for the slightly lighter tones of his face then. Basically just wipe the brush a little bit before I pick up the lighter tone. Put some flesh tone in there. Okay. And that would do for the time being. I could paint her, as I've got that flesh tone, I could paint her face in at the same time. Maybe use that on the hands as well. Use a little bit on his hands. So again, most of his hand is catching the light. There's a little bit of shadow on the knuckles, so that's the lighter bit. Got a little bit darker for the shadow across the knuckles. I'm not going to try and paint all the fingers right away. I just want to get that kind of almost like mitten shape, and then I can then sort of break into that to later time. Just put a little bit more definition there. So that'd be fine for the minute. We'll do the other hand as well on there, but I'll just leave that for perhaps a little bit highlight. And then perhaps just work some of the colours on his body. So I'll just do maybe his hair, a little bit of his, what would be good to do first? Perhaps maybe his shirt first, because his hair almost like overlaps his shirt, and then his hat overlaps his hair. So that might be a good order to layer the marks. So you just got to think about how could I interpret this subject in paint marks, and what would be the best order. So his shirt is a slightly crimsony, slightly, it's like a crimson with a lot of light reflecting off of it. So I'll add a little bit of white to that. That can go, that's a bit too light, isn't it? Maybe a bit of blue as well, just to tone it in a bit. And a bit more white. Yeah, something a bit like that would work, I think. A bit redder than that actually. A little bit of red and a little bit of mixed yellow. Yeah, that's a bit better. So that could go there. I could work, I could really do the whole of the shirt. I won't do that right now, because I think you can imagine that. Perhaps lighten that tiny bit over there, where the light's reflecting off his arm. That can go a little bit lighter. So yeah, his shirt's going to be into about there. So a little bit more shadow just in this section here. Just make that a bit darker there. Just a bit of blue in that.
Using blue to darken it?
Yeah, using ultramarine just to get that a little bit darker. And then a little bit of his hair, so I'll just rinse that brush and dry it. What I find with the brushes is I don't like the paint to get too wet, so I'll give it a rinse and I'll dry that off. So it's not really tripping with the paint. And then some of the burnt umber here for his hair. And again, I'm not going to worry too much about the highlights. There's highlights there. I want to get those darker tones in first. So his hair's just curling around here, I think, just around there. So get those darks in first. It's actually a little bit darker in places, so I'm going to add a tiny bit of the ultramarine blue again, just to sort of darken that off just in there. And yeah, some of it's slightly reddy, but in the shadows it's a little bit cooler, I think. So it can be the shadow areas. And then his hat itself, yeah, just I think the ultramarine blue would do that. So just thin that slightly, I think. That's going to be kind of up to there. Something like that. The lights, it's catching a little bit of light at the front there, so maybe I'll just lighten that a bit. Again, I'm not trying to attempt any sort of texture or anything like that at this stage. What I'll probably do is just come back in if I want to get any details of like the ribbing on the woolly hat and things like that. But that would be, so basically it's kind of blocks of colour everywhere. That would be the first layer. Perhaps let that dry for a day or so, and then come back and work details into that. That's you. If I've got the time, that's how I would approach an oil painting, particularly in the studio. If I'm working outside very quickly, perhaps I get this down and then I'd work into the paint while it's still wet. But it's a bit easier if the paint's dried, really, to work into it. Do exactly the same with the acrylics. The acrylics will just dry quicker, so you've got to work a bit quicker. To get, if you're making a mix of paint, that will dry quite quickly, so just need to be quicker. But it's very similar sort of process. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Any questions? So yeah, but if anybody wants to use any of the oils or the acrylics, I want
My question would be,
Yeah.
you know exactly what color to get to the right color.
Yeah.
I think I need to understand that.
Yeah, so there's a bit on colour mix. Yeah, I'll give you a colour wheel.
The other thing is pastel oil. I've never used
Going to say to you.
what it is.
Yeah,
What
yeah.
it is, I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I'll just drop this.
That's